Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you.
I'm a risk taker, so I decided to jump into the pits of hell and get started on my research. But what I wanted to do is talk about Alvin Ailey Dance Foundation Incorporated. There's a passion that I have for dance, but there's a curiosity I have about money organizations that are larger than any of the ones I work at. And anyone familiar with Alvin Ailey, I wanted to be really clear. Oh, you're totally dainty, right? Oh, okay. Anyone familiar with Alvin Ailey, what I will, as a disclaimer, I'm not going to talk about the dance theater. I'm talking about the large umbrella, which is the foundation, because that's where the budgeting really comes out of. So what I want to do is just give you a quick overview. We are familiar, we know that Alvin Ailey started this dance theater in the late 50s, and it was actually about 10 years later that the foundation itself was incorporated. So the foundation is actually the umbrella, and it carries all the business units, or AKA programmatic units. So one of the things I do want to point out is that in my research, I was able to discover that they're dually registered. And that's important for nonprofits, because either you are registered under charitable organization laws, or there are funds, trusts, estates, etc., that also can incorporate, even though it's under nonprofit, but they're under regulation of different laws. That means their accounting procedures have to abide by those laws. Okay? As of 2012, 2013, overall, we have 740 employees, but about 129 of them are full-time administrative, artistic, fundraising, and technical professionals. The business components under the umbrella, of course, is the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, as it's now known. Alvin Ailey 2, which is still a professional troupe, but they are young, rising artists. The Ailey School, that's a training ground for the professional division, so people come out of that and hopefully they audition into their own Alvin Ailey professional, either young group or the actual dance theater. The Ailey Extension is where people like us, me, Elise, we go to take classes because it's open to the public. And the Arts and Education Program is in partnership with New York City and even outside of New York City, with the public schools, workshops in the park, etc. That's the biggest publicly funded component. And the newest piece is the Legacy. It's really a college-level residency program. So they're actually marrying their dance program with education components at undergraduate level. So when I went to research it, I did tell Dr. Oliver that unfortunately they're not releasing yet their 14 budget, their 13, 14, because for the last 5 years now, Ailey has filed extensions, like when we do our taxes. So I looked back at everything, especially given the fact that in this class we've been talking about when is it that the government jumps in and helps a company, even if it's a nonprofit. So what I did is I went ahead and I looked at the operational budget, which was the core of our assignment. But to understand how they roll through rough times, we have to also look at their fund balances. So I'm going to present that. So the next slide in your handout, you don't have it, but I just want to show you, since we've been talking about what's been bad since 2008, 2009, these are the budget years ending these dates. Because again, I don't have ending 13, so this is going into 13. I'm going to just be real clear with that. Okay? So we had problems in 2008, recession, downturn. This is a statement, I mean, this is just a graph of their revenues. So as low as 20.3 million in 2009 until 2013, they were able to actually budget 39 million, okay? That sounds crazy, right? I was looking like, what's that? How's that?
Well, it's doubled in 2 years.
Again, we're talking about the components of operational budget, and that's the key. So I'm going to explain to you how that's possible for them to do, because it's the secret of their success, trust me. But let's look at 1 year. We're going to look at 13 and talk about what they're spending their money on. So basically, I mean, not what they're spending money on, what their revenues are, where they're getting their funding. Only 6%. Now again, we're talking about a foundation. They're operating a trust. And I remember in one class we talked about nonprofits can't make a profit. Nonprofits make all sorts of profits. It's what they do with the money. And so there are two types of laws that they're actually operating under. So part of the Alvin A. Lee Dance Foundation invests. They can under trust law. They can collect interest. They can collect dividends. So some of their revenue comes from those dividends, but it is a small amount, at 6%. The next largest component is in their, I combine it as grants, endowment draws, which is key, donors, which is really key for A. Lee, because we're talking individual donors, we're talking estate donors, we're also now talking about corporate sponsors. Every concert, dance, performance we've seen, who's labeled on there? American Express, Citibank. They have significant financial partners in this venture. And it makes up for 36% of the revenue, at least in this year, okay? I do want to point out that of that 36%, or $14.3 million in revenues for that year, only $460,000. Yep, only $460,000 came from the government, okay? Their combined income for programs, so I matched it together, 58%, okay? So that's where their money's coming from. Their expenditures over the same 5-year period, though, remember the previous one, it kind of was down and up? This is where you should be making faces, because in 2009, it didn't look like they had a lot of revenue, but they sure had higher expenditures. The lighter part is administrative, and the darkest part is program, but let's dissect it down for 1 year. Administrative costs as of 2013 is 17%, but program operations is 83% for this year. Okay, so there's a formula called the 20/80. Try not to spend more than 20% on your administrative costs. They're doing well with it. Some of their liabilities are things that they owe, and I'm just going to, for the sake of time, just let you know they have $20 million in liability in that year, that same 2013 year. That's the bills that still need to be paid, accounts payable, etc. Okay? Assets are things that they have saved, non-interest-bearing account, cash. They do it in 3 categories, which is why you can say how did they double revenue, because it's coming from somewhere else. So unrestricted, 56%, temporarily restricted, and then restricted. Okay, so in 2013 on the books, their fund balance was $136,000. But if they had total assets of 156 and took away the actual liability, that's their net. That's their safety net, literally, and it's huge. Okay. Some of the challenges, I'm just going to go through these really quickly. We know that the face internally and externally, so I'm going to combine the slides. The face has changed for both the dance theater, but also, Judy Davis has stepped down, but also their executive, that was 30 seconds before, sorry. The executive director of the actual foundation also changed. And this all happened after the economic downturn. And cost of doing business in general rises, so they have to keep that 20/80 formula. So external challenges, again, the downturn, again, unknown to the public and their corporate sponsors, all these new faces, but they were smart. They brought in people from inside on both ends, the foundation and the American Dance Theater. So they didn't lose the confidence that their people were vested in. The summary, basically, it's a mixed economy in Alabama, okay? They have a small amount of government funding, but they have it. They use private partners, they use individual donors, and they smartly use to their advantage the ability to get investment income. They have to maintain that conservative oversight of their board and how they do their finances, because that's what keeps their safety net in place. Again, work to be made within that 20/80. Small organizations are very challenged by that. And one of the suggestions I've made is that they're in a prime position to actually globalize their business. We have Albany, the American Dance Theater, but why can't they be in London and doing Albany in London and operating as a business? Okay. Just some of our resources so far, and this is pretty much what make up my paper. I'm done. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
No, great.
Oh, thank you.
Very informational.
Very thorough, very
Yes.
thorough, very good.
Thank All in 7 minutes, so.
Sheila, that was a very good presentation. You set the bar really high.
You sure did.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
Yes, you did.
But I want to ask you, this organization had a very large safety net. What did they do during the good times to build such a strong safety net?
The good times go way back to as far back as 1968. And it's their conservative management. The one slide where it showed the restricted, unrestricted, they control as they're earning income from dividends or there's restricted grants. I mean, in fact, when they built the building in Midtown and it opened in 2004, so on 55th where they're at, so now they're not paying rent to someone else, they're collecting rent because other people rent their space. They have just put in place so many smart business practices. For a nonprofit, they're operating as a for-profit. I didn't know those are the kind of numbers you can see for, you know, a really successful small company. So I'm
Yeah, you are.
they've been very conservative. Wow. They control their assets. And then the years where they had operational deficits, that's where they draw on, either from the endowment or wherever where it's not restricted. That's where they're able to draw.
Wow.
Not to say it's not challenging, but they're able to do it. Yes.
How do they own that property? How do they hold title?
Because they are a dual registrant, they own the property, in fact, most nonprofits don't pay taxes, as we know, if they're tax exempt. But there are.
Real estate taxes as well?
Exactly, but because they're a dual registrant, and I don't have access yet to the details or the contracts or any of that stuff, there are organizations that pay then land tax, and I forget how that works, and I'm not even putting that in here because it's kind of outside of the scope, but then they might owe tax, but they own the property depreciates and appreciates like our cars and things like that. So, I mean, a lot of organizations actually lease space. This is one that has the ability and can take the risk of owning the space.
Can you talk a bit more about the liabilities? I know they have this healthy fund balance that they've been able to maintain since the 60s. But talk a bit about this $21 million liability.
And that was just for that year. Every time in a budget process, there's a budget analyst, and I was like pulling his head because he only wanted to talk to me about operational budget, and I knew that's not all in the story here. So the liabilities are things like their budget year ends on June 30th. So they're not even required to file their taxes till December. Every nonprofit, we have April, they have 6 months after the close, whatever that close is. So that liability are all the bills we still owe, but as of today.
Okay.
Because we have to count for it, because now we're closing out the budget year. But we still owe rent, we still have some salaries to pay, we still have to draw down on grants.
Right.
And that's important to know, because in our other class, the guys mentioned we get all this grant for public projects, but then what happens is that either the money dries up or they re-divert it to the vets or somewhere else.
Or it's not a reimbursement.
Right, but it's a liability because you've already invested into, and it has value. We know that we're gonna build this bridge, and we're putting 20 million aside for it from this $500 million grant, but we don't get the rest of it. That's a liability for our started to work. So, does that answer?
Yeah, so it doesn't impact upon their fund balance at all, although they're drawing down funds after they've already been.
Well, no, the way it works.
Especially for the grant.
Well, no, the way it works is that for the fund balance to be healthy, whatever they have in assets and whatever they have in liabilities, the scale has to be, because you're gonna take the net asset.
Right, I understand.
Right.
But I was just wondering, how does the fund balance stay at that level when a lot of their liabilities, especially for this year, haven't been completely accounted for?
Well, because they had 156 million. So once they subtracted the 20, they still had that healthy balance. So they're still drawing down on interest, they're still collecting rents, they still have somebody's estate that died and gave them $50 million maybe in the 70s. I mean, again, I didn't have access to that line detail, but that money's sitting aside growing under the oversight of the trust laws in New York State. Yeah, that's the way I would do it. It's not a no.
Just to help you out a little bit,
Yeah, you know.
Sandy Wow is, I think, the president and CEO of JP Morgan Chase. They are their biggest supporter. That building that she was talking about is named the Joan and Sandy Wow Dance Theater or Dance Building or something like that. They basically paid for the building for them and
So that's the dual.
gifted to Alvin Ailey's.
What gifted it?
They gifted,
And
yes.
gifted it to them after they had it built. So it doesn't show that as a gift. I think there's no taxes on the gift to a nonprofit.
In that case,
So that's how they were able, and so they doesn't have to, they don't have to pay the tax,
Right.
kind of thing on that. But they have a big, I've been to their gala once a year. They have one of the biggest galas, and it's, I think it's right around the Christmas tree lighting ceremony. And because he runs from there to the theater, and you talked about the money that they make on that one night.
It's-
That gala is, it's
You
amazing.
said 120 million?
Yeah, you
Something
a
like that?
ballpark figure.
Over just that one rental space? I mean, that one piece of
What was
property?
I saying?
Wait a minute, the millions that you're talking about,
Millions. Yeah.
millions, right? So this particular property that you guys are talking about, that's just a small entity of what they're doing, right?
That's my point. It is a small entity, but they have lots of them.
Oh, yeah?
Oh,
They have lots of diverse sort of interests like
Oh.
that. They have a lot of diverse activity that draws them income. I mean, they have individuals that write a check that's actually $4 million. They have individuals, I mean, I work for nonprofits, we have $500 from you. So they have lots of them. And the key to remember about Alvin Ailey, they are, although they're based here, they are a global entity. Their people write checks from China. They have people, it's the arts.
right.
You know, and we can talk about, like in the class, we talk about essential services.
Uh-huh.
Well, most people will, and I've done development for art, that art's not an essential service, I mean, who cares about culture? But there will be, you know, we talk about the social factors, what influence it, guess what? People will fight for their art. Okay, you cut it a little bit, don't cut it at all, it leaves our brains dead, it doesn't inspire children, I mean, there's many reasons to justify it. So, their $460,000 are a very tiny piece of government grants, that's because they're going after the federal money, they got city money. I did see where they had New York City Youth and Children's Services for their schools, which is education. So they value that, but
Thank you, Mel.
as a society, we value it too.
Go ahead. You gonna get your point good.
Yeah.
That was very good, huh?
Yes.
First one out the gate. Right. First one out the gate. That was good. Set the bar high. Alright. So now we're sitting up here, and everyone's going to be prepared to peel it. But listen, don't be scared. Stand up. You're good. Alright.
Nobody's scared of me.
There is a camera back there. I'm recording.
I didn't know that.
Oh, I
lectures.
Yeah.
Right now, the camera's faced at me and the screen. What I want to do is I'm recording my lectures so that I can look over them so I can get better as time goes on. It will rapidly increase, will speed up my learning process so I can see how the crowd feels, how something comes across, so forth and so on. All right? So that's what I'm doing.
That's cool.
But don't be afraid to ask questions. If for some reason you're on the camera, before anyone gets put out there on anything, you have to sign off on something, all right? So nobody's going to be put on YouTube or commercial or something like that without their permission or anything like that, okay? Yes. I'm still working. Okay, let's get started. Now, today's lecture is about governance of what they call a disarticulated state. All right? Disarticulated means that there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle in the American system of governance. All right? This is one of the most highly fragmented systems of governance in the world. Now, say, what do you mean by fragmented? All right? means that yes, we do have one federal government. 50 states, which we all know about, right? But under the federal government, and under the 50 states, we have local government, which provides the bulk of public services. When you first wake up in the morning, flush that toilet, and turn on the shower, the water services. The local government provides that. Get in your car, jump on a road, it's the local government. When you jump on a train, bus, it's the local agency. Right? You have to call the police, call the paramedics, it's the local agency. You go to a park. At some point in your life, on a daily basis, you are consuming the service of a public agency, and most likely the local government. It's very rare that you come in contact with the federal government, unless you've done something really bad, or you work for the federal government, or you're lobbying the federal government. State government, you rarely come in contact with it. I mean, right now, somebody tell me, when was the last time they came in contact with the state?
Income tax.
Income tax, right?
When I owe.
That's really when you come in contact with the federal government. Well, they come in contact with you every pay period, all right? You come in contact with them about once a year, all right? Get a tax return, get that check. Say, hey, I'm Sam, I like you. If they're taking your money, well, you don't like it. They take the money before you can see it anyway, right? That's really the relationship that you have, that most people have with the state government and the federal government. Income tax. It's that once in a year relationship, all right? With the county, it's a little bit more intimate. Local government, I mean, listen, if something happens, who do you call and complain to? Call City Hall. The water main's busted. That tree fell down in the street. Busted, the trains aren't running. That police officer's talking bad to my kid. There's a fire. I want these potholes filled in my street. The local services. So in terms of governance in the United States, when people really come in contact with government, it's at a local level. All right? Counties, there are about 3,000. Well, this is from 2012. There's 3,034 county level governments in the country. National municipalities, cities, towns, and villages, there are almost 20,000, 19,429. Townships, about 16,000. School districts, which we've all dealt with at some point or another, right? About 13,500. Then you have this special category of single-purpose districts. Fire protection, provide water service, sometimes public safety, police, libraries, hospitals, community college districts. The list goes on and on and on. Right? There are 87,576 units of government in the United States that provide a whole range and host of services. This is the most really the most fragmented system of governance in the world. Now, in terms of budgeting and finance, we cover this because there's certain variables that impact the budget of each and every one of these units of government. All right? And now what I want to do, give you a visual, what I mean by fragmentation. New York City region. In the city, there's about 8.3 million people. There's about 19.5 million people that live around the city. All right? So New York City, it contains about 40% of the people in the region. All right? The other 60% live in other cities around New York City that provide the same types of services. All right? Same thing with Los Angeles. One city, the big city where everybody knows. And there's a lot of smaller cities around it that provide the same type of services. All right? So Los Angeles has about 4 million people. In the region, has about 12 million. So it's about 30% contained in a large city. All right? Same thing with Chicago. And there's Dallas. All right? Need some of the numbers. I'm just saying. So here, you have what they call the Metropolitan Statistical Area, the MSA. That is what the census uses to count the amount of people that live in a region. The Metropolitan Statistical Area. They had to come up with that term in the 1970s. Because starting in the 70s, 60s really, into the 70s, a lot of the people in the region didn't just live in the large city. They started moving outside of the cities. All right? This is a way to capture people that live in a region. All right? Now, we talk about public services or any governmental entity. It means that that organization has a monopoly over the provision of a particular service in that area. Incorporating as a governmental entity means that now you have a monopoly over the provision of a particular type of service. All right? Service that's been deemed to have a market failure, be a pure public good, like we talked about last week. All right? Now, what's the problem with monopolies? The answer's right in front of you. Don't be scared. Don't be shy. Say it. Higher price and less supply. Right? Because the incentive, right? Remember, it's economics. The rational man. Right? You have monopoly. The incentive is there to charge a higher price. To keep that price high, you restrict the supply. Vice versa. The supply is restricted because you're not working that hard to increase the supply. Because you have a monopoly.
I just, to add on to that, I just heard on the news that United Water, I think it's just New Jersey, they negotiated their contracts where they do not, if a water main breaks, they do not have to pay for the repair. The taxpayers do. And they've done that with just about all of their contracts, except for a new one they haven't made on. So if a water main breaks in that town or city that they are in, the money doesn't come from them to make that repair, it comes from the taxpayers.
And the taxpayers being the people who live on the street, or that's municipality that it's in? Did they say?
Yeah, the municipality or the town that they service, the towns that they service. So each town in New Jersey negotiated their own contract.
With the
And
water?
most of them have negotiated the same type of contract. They got some upfront money, but over the long haul, it's not a good investment for the taxpayer, because if a 56-inch water main breaks, that's gonna cost millions of dollars, a lot more than what it was for the upfront payments.
And they have a cap on it. The cap is only $5,000.
$5,000, yes. So only thing they ever have to pay out for repair or anything is $5,000.
Yeah, okay.
And you know what's interesting about that is that when you think of water supply, you think of your city, the local agency. But this company, this public agency that you're talking about, they're a larger water provider, right? I assume that they bring water down from up north, or they have storage facilities, lakes or dams or something like that, and they transport it to a particular region. And then they sell the water to smaller local agencies, and then it's coming directly to the households. Now the thing is this, most people, if you're not really conscious, you don't even know this organization exists. If you have a problem with your water, you're going to call City Hall.
Yeah.
All right? The people at City Hall, they know, they're intimately familiar with this water company because they have to pay a bill every month. If their bill goes up, they have to increase taxes. So what you're doing, you go down to the city council meeting, write a letter to your council person, tell them how much you don't like them and how much you want to protest against this. All right? City Hall takes the flak, but they don't really have the power because their bills are getting raised. All right? So it's a chain reaction. All right? But one of the things is, underlying this, is the more insulated the organization is, the less incentive they have to keep the prices as low as possible. And another thing is that they're a monopoly. There's no way to really know how much it really costs to provide that service.
Excuse me, could you repeat the more insulated, the last?
The more insulated an agency is, the less incentive they have to control prices.
The more incentive?
The less incentive.
Less incentive. Less incentive. They want to keep. Is that true in the case of I think it was on Long Island after Hurricane Sandy? I don't know if it was LIPA, that I think excuse me, the taxpayers are being, or the customers rather, are being charged double now. Or the rates went up twice since Sandy. Is that sort of?
Well, what the utility company would say, our infrastructure has been destroyed and we have to pay for it.
So that's what they'll tell the public.
The
But
cost has to be borne by the public.
twice, I believe, yeah.
They have to go to the state to seek approval.
They can just do that.
The state approves it. We'll get into that in just a minute, but there's a process that they have to go through. But there's flaws that are in the process. But one of the things, the reason why I say it, the more insulated an organization is, if they have a monopoly, the less incentive they have to control prices, is because they don't have to really deal with the ramifications of their actions. And they don't have direct competition. So it's not like the people who live in an area can get up and just move to a different area, right? And you can, theoretically, but there's a cost involved in that too. Are you going to move because your water bill doubled? What's it cost to move? What is the inconvenience? You got to get a realtor. You got to put a sign in your front yard. You got to have people come and look at your house. All right? Every weekend. You have to negotiate. Then you got to find another place. All right? There's a cost involved in moving. So, your water bill goes from $100 to $200 a month. It hurts. It takes money out of your pocket. But most likely, it's not going to make you move. Now, again, public agencies, they give it a monopoly power. So it could be your police, your water company, your trash company, your refuse removal, the library district, school district, your parks, a lot of hospitals, quite a few of them. Your toll highways, fire departments. Either they can be provided by the city, or a single, special district, or a mix thereof, or something, right? And somehow or another, either in rent that you're paying, or your property taxes, you're paying for all these services.
Right.
But if one increases the price, most likely it's not going to be enough to make you move, all right? If they all do, maybe, maybe not. But in a way, when you buy into an area, you're buying the services that are provided, and what you can afford. Now again, it goes back, that water district raising the rates is a good example. Because there's no real way to go in and understand, or even to compute and know, how much does it really cost to provide water to a region. You have to build the dams, you have to build the infrastructure, that's a cost. There's maintenance costs. And then after you have all that, there's labor costs, specialized labor. And then that labor is labor negotiations, union negotiations. And there's a union. The wages are typically higher. There's benefits, there's pensions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So that bill that comes to you is what they say the cost is. But there's no formula out there to tell you what the true cost of the provision of the service is or monopoly. This is the problem. Because every year that tax bill rises. Every year.
Question though, I mean, even though we're talking about the monopoly, so if you say that there's no formula to say how much that costs, how is it, I mean, there is a formula, they just don't have to do these costs.
True formula. Yeah, well,
I mean, you know,
there's
you
a
want to
cost.
make this pen,
There's a
they know
cost,
how much it costs.
and there's a true cost. Right? Let me break this down. That's a very good question. A cost is the bill that you get. True cost is the most efficient means of providing the service. Meaning that the organization does everything it can to keep the cost as low as possible. That means for infrastructure, that means for every brick that's bought, every employee that's there, we're paying them as low as possible. Benefits are as low as possible. You're buying the cheapest gas that you can. they're doing as much as they can to keep the costs as low as possible. In theory, that's what you want. In truth, in practicality, does that happen? And can that happen? The concept is even, can it possibly happen? As a manager, you want to keep the costs down. But at some point, you have to deal with labor. Inflation's going up. They have skills. You don't want people to strike. You negotiate, give them what they want. You can't fire them, because that's not the way the public sector works. You can't just go and hire the cheapest people that you can find. You can't just go put an ad on Craigslist. Say $10 an hour, come in, we'll start you working tomorrow. Some nonprofits operate that way. Public sector doesn't tend to operate that way. It's kind of abstract, I know that. But just the best way to think about it is to say, okay, you go to the store, you need some shoes, you go to the store, you buy the cheapest that you can find, or do you just spend a little extra to get something that you think is the nicest or nice, yet economical? Alright? Now you're always able to make it to reason. This is better. You're always able to reason. You look down at your feet and say, oh, this is a good choice. Alright? Good choice.
You buy cheap, you get cheap.
Alright?
I was just telling Cynthia, it just reminds me of like insurance. Sometimes depending on the type of insurance, you may get generic or non-generic, depending on the type of insurance you get. So it kind of like working back into that.
Yeah, you hear the commercials on the radio, $25 a month, you'll be legal. Yeah, right? You try to get them to pay that insurance, probably cost you more than the repair, than your car is worth. Alright? Because that's how they make their money, keeping people from collecting. Alright? So the answer is no.
Those are people.
Yeah. The N O the O.
All these people can bring their minds together, figure out what is the true cost of that monopoly. Right? This is the problem, especially when you're dealing with administrators. They know their job like the back of their hand. You can sit over their shoulder and watch them. They'll show you how they go about doing their business. Right? They'll show you the right way, by the book. Right? They'll show you why it costs so much to do a certain task. Now, when you're gone, people are hanging out, talking, smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, taking long lunches, coming in late, sitting on Facebook. Or now it's the cell phones to get around the screening systems that they have on the computers. All right? This is a notorious problem in the public sector. How do you really know how much you can get out of that employee? Or out of that agency, out of that organization? What is the true cost of providing service? There's no way to really know. You can do studies. There are studies after studies after studies after studies. Nobody's cracked that formula yet. Some people, they have complex studies, but nobody really knows. I went over a couple of the reasons. But the main thing is this. The only way to really know is to go in and to try to do an analysis on the job classification, what's all done by the work, so forth and so on. But when it's skilled labor, the people who know the job the most are the people who are in that profession. public sector now, it's 53% of the people have at least a bachelor's. Almost as many have masters. For private sector, it's about 24% people have bachelors. The private sector is a lot more, public sector is a lot more skilled labor. But you also don't know everything in public administration. There's a political aspect to it. Again, there's a union negotiation, all right? It's what can get approved by the political process. And sometimes that adds to the cost of a project. And all that is put into the bill. So when you get your tax bill, that's the end cost. You don't know what all went into the cost, all right? Show you a video with a concept called bureaucratic capture, the revolving door. One of the main challenges, especially since public sector, most employees are highly skilled, is that they have the knowledge, the ins and outs on how the system works. And sometimes people, there's a revolving door, they go to the private sector, get a paycheck, and they show, I guess, private individuals how to manipulate and work the system to their benefit. And in doing that, that ultimately adds to the price tag of a service. Healthcare, infrastructure projects, a lot of big ticket items, all right?
This is the East Mid Department. Talk about the culture of Washington, the insiders riding the rooms to protect the privileged and powerful. Talk about the state of this small island political last week. Quote, Elizabeth Fowler is leaving the White House for a senior level position leading global health policy at Johnson & Johnson's Government Affairs and Policy. Listen to Eve Smith and Bruce Bartlett talk about the culture of Washington, with insiders riding the rooms to protect the privileged and powerful. I couldn't help but think of this small item in Politico last week. Quote, Elizabeth Fowler is leaving the White House for a senior level position leading global health policy at Johnson & Johnson.
Put your chair right there.
Listening to Eve Smith and Bruce Bartlett talk about the culture of Washington, with insiders riding the rooms to protect the privileged and powerful, I couldn't help but think of this small item in Politico last week. Quote, Elizabeth Fowler is leaving the White House for a senior level position leading global health policy at Johnson & Johnson's Government Affairs and Policy Group. When I read that item, I had an aha moment, a flashback to 3 years ago and our coverage of the early stages of Obama's health care reform. Liz Fowler was at the center of the action. Here's an excerpt.
Take a close look at that woman sitting behind Montana Senator Max Baucus. He's the Democrat who's the chairman of the Finance Committee. Liz Fowler is her name. And now get this. She used to work for WellPoint, the largest health insurer in the country. She was vice president of public policy. And now she's working for the very committee, the most power to give her own company and the entire industry exactly what they want.
After Obamacare passed, Senator Baucus himself one of the biggest recipients in Congress of campaign cash from the industry, boasted that the architect of this legislation was none other than the industry insider, Liz Fowler.
And I want to single out one person. And that one person is sitting next to me. Her name is Liz Fowler. Liz Fowler is our chief health counsel. Liz Fowler has put my team together, the healthcare team. She put together the white paper last November 2008, 87-page document, which became the basis, the foundation, the blueprint from which almost all healthcare measures and all bills, both sides of the aisle came from. She's an amazing person. She's a wonderful. She's a PhD. She's just so decent. She's always smiling. She's always working. So it's always available to help any senator, any staff. And I just thank Liz from all my heart.
The healthcare industry was very pleased too. Early on in the evolution of Obamacare, the Senate and the White House cut deals that protected the interests of the healthcare industry, especially the insurance and pharmaceutical companies. Lobbied, beat back some popular proposals as a public option, an expansion of Medicare, and a requirement that drug companies negotiate the prices they charge. As the eagle-eyed Ben Greenwald wrote in The Guardian last week, the bill's mandate that everyone purchase the products of the private health insurance industry was a huge gift to that industry. And this time, the White House brought her over from Congress to oversee the new law's implementation, first at the Department of Health and Human Services, and then as Special Assistant to the President for Health Care and Economic Policy. And now, it's through the revolving door once more. Crystal has come a little early for the peripatetic Miss Fowler as she moves the White House for the pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson. Lynn Greenwald writes, Miss Fowler will receive ample rewards from that same industry as she peddles her influence in government and exploits her experience with its inner workings to work on that industry's behalf. All of which, Lynn Greenwald says, has been made perfectly legal by the same insular Versailles-like Washington culture that so lavishly benefits from all this. Now, friends of Liz Fowler will say this is harsh, that she was a talented, intelligent protege of two liberal Democrats, Representative Pete Starr and Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, both of whom believed in public service as a calling, that she was seriously devoted to crafting a health care reform proposal that would pass. I don't doubt that, but it's not the point. She's emblematic of the revolving door culture that inevitably means, when push comes to shove, that corporate interests will have the upper hand in the close calls that determine public policy. It's how insiders fix the rules of the market, no matter which party is in power. The last time we looked, 34 former staff members of Senator Baucus, whose finance committee has life and death power over industry's wish list, were registered lobbyists, more than a third of them working on healthcare issues in the private sector. And the revolving door spins even faster after a big election like the one we had last month, as scores of officials, elected representatives, and their staffs vacate their offices after the ballots are counted. Many of them head for K Street and the highest bidder. That too brings an aha moment, when President Obama, early on in his administration, swore he would get tough.
As of today, lobbyists will be subject to stricter limits than under any other administration in history. If you are a lobbyist entering my administration, you will not be able to work on matters you lobbied on or in the agencies you lobbied during the previous 2 years. When you leave government, you will not be able to lobby my administration for as long as I am president. And there will be a ban on gifts by lobbyists to anyone serving in the administration as well.
The president signed reforms that are supposed to slow down the revolving door, increase transparency, and limit the contact ex-officials and office holders can have with their former colleagues. But those rules and regulations have loopholes big enough for Sally and its later try through, reindeer included. The market keeps growing, with insiders poised to make a killing when they leave government to help their new bosses get what they want from government. That's the great thing about the revolving door. One good turn deserves another.
new healthcare law, right? Fought hard to get that passed. You know, that was some groundbreaking legislation. I mean, this country has been trying to do that for 80 years, get the healthcare law passed, right? Now, you have, we pull up this, the lobbyist, all right, who's an insider, helped get the legislation written, now work for Johnson & Johnson. She makes a healthy paycheck, but this is the big question right here. If those deals, backdoor deals, weren't done with the pharmaceutical companies, could the legislation have even been passed? No. That's an even bigger question. Why not?
Well, I mean, you know, truthfully speaking, conservative from my own point of view, if you're not going to produce corporate America, why not? Now, with the healthcare reform that's coming through now, yeah, it's reformed, and things are going to be done differently, but, you know, these companies, these HMOs or whatever, are still going to make a lot of money. As a matter of fact, they're going to make even more money because they're going to have more people, you know, using their products. You know, with regards to the legislation, you know, it all has to become law before it becomes pertinent. You know, before you start using it. You know, these cats own these politicians. They pay for their re-election campaigns. They pay for this and they pay for that. They're not going to do all this paying if they're not going to get some scratch in the back. You know, and I'm not saying it's, you know, it's just to, you know, pour cold water on progress, certainly, but, you know, if somebody didn't play ball, no, I don't think the legislation would pass at all.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
I went to the Senator's introduction on, well, an overview explanation of the Affordable Care Act. 2.4 million of New Yorkers do not have health care. Okay. Part of
So less than 12%.
2. That's about, yeah. So that's, what a lot of people don't understand is that there are a lot of other programs that's attached to it, not just people getting health care. You've got preventative care that's involved with this. You've got grants to hospitals and universities as incentives for scholarships to produce more doctors and nurses. So there's a whole lot more to this whole bill or law than just people getting health care insurance. There's a big broad spectrum that goes along with it. Health First is New York City's, well, primarily Bronx. They're the Bronx area's healthcare provider, okay? And they are managed by all of the hospitals in the Bronx. So Lincoln, Jacoby, St. Barnabas, all of them own a piece of Health First. The funds that Health First has at the end of the year, that's over their budget of operating expenses, gets donated back to the hospital pool, which is why no hospital can turn anybody away. You're going to get the care whether you can afford to get the care or not. Now, at least the hospitals are going to have a way to absorb some of that cost for people that don't have it. We just got it today. If you don't have health insurance and you choose not to get it, when you file your taxes, you're going to be penalized $95, and that's the first year. If you have no health insurance. Okay, so
$95?
$95.
Has anyone ever tried to just walk up to a doctor's office and pay?
It's about $170 for that whole day.
And you're lucky if they'll take you.
The specialist about $170.
If you don't have a copay.
Yeah. So $95 don't sound bad, you know.
Well, that's the first year. The second year is 300 and change, and then the third year is 600 and change.
See?
So it's increasingly going up if you do not have, if you choose not to have any health care. You're going to be penalized by the federal government.
Yeah, see, they'll visit you once a year, right? The relationship. So one of the things here to get is that any public program, politics are involved, and they're counting mathematical equations and say this program is part of the program, this is part of the program, this is part of the program, this is how many people we have. But the mere operation of a certain part of the program, some of the locations, the target market, the types of facilities, in a way may not be the most efficient, but that was required to get the program started to begin with. That's added to the cost of the program. Or the cost of the service. That's the national level. Healthcare cost is a large percentage of the federal budget. That's 60 of the total budget. That's non-discretionary. It's going to keep rising as the population age rises. But a lot of that cost isn't the most efficient. I mean, how many of you saw a real medical bill?
Plenty of times.
There's one that's submitted to the federal government, then one that's sent to you. Sometimes people receive it and say, this is crazy. How can I pay $1,000 for Q-tips or a prescription drug or a Band-Aid? Ambulance run, they used to be $700, now some places at $1,500, some places $2,000, $3,000. It just, so how much does it really cost? How much are they paying for rent? How much do they buy the vehicle for? How much do they put in gas? How much does that person really cost? All right? How many people are they picking up per day? Now you can go and do those figures, and a lot of times it doesn't add up. It's the power of monopoly. All right? It's been an issue that people have continually revisited time and time again, especially during times of economic challenge. Because now it matters. Sending you a bill for $1,000 here, $1,000 there. Garnishing properties, so forth and so on. All right? Public administration has been around since 1887. In the 1970s, there was a big push to try to address this problem, this conundrum. It's not a full answer. Public choice theory. Economic analysis, wrapping the political process, economic analysis. The underlying theories that everyone operates as rational actors, trying to maximize their benefit and their utility. And on one hand, the political process, it's easier to see that it's not rational. But for administrators, who are supposed to be rationally, professionally trained administrators, delivering public services, the cheapest cost, people always wonder why the price keeps going up. Services, the service quality doesn't go up. Sometimes it goes down. Right? There's a little bit of history. In 71, bureaucracy and representative government. They use the principal agent theory to demonstrate how to incentivize public agents to behave in a certain manner. All right? Do you want to remember the principal agent theory? What do we use for an example? Prisoner's dilemma. All right? Agent, the principal, has all the information. The agents, they have time hanging over their head. Most likely, they're not going to do what's optimal for both. One's going to rat the other one out. Because at least one of them knows that they're going to get a better deal than what they otherwise might get. It's hard to trust another. You don't really know that other person, organization, individual, so forth and so on. So in a way, there's competition going on here. All right? And in this sense, in this democratic political process, politicians, their real power is to approve or disapprove a budget. That's where their power really lies. During the budgeting process, you give their vote yay or nay. Now there's other things, there's other perks, but that's one of the main things every year. But people who are elected to represent citizens, they really don't know how much it costs to provide a service because it's a monopoly. All they can do is look at the budget that's presented in front of them. So this theory says, well, why don't we make the public agencies compete with one another for our funds? So they compete with one another. They compete with one another, then they'll undercut one another. They undercut one another, then we know how much it really costs to provide the service.
Right.
Bring the market into the monopoly. Break down the monopoly. It's the easy way to say it. Easier said than done. Now these ideas were kicked around for some time. It took about 20 years. Early 1990s, for this to become serious. Reinventing government, movement, federal government, under Clinton, led by Gore. They led this movement that created performance measures for each department. And once performance measures are demarcated, and for certain services, where it's possible, you contract out to private individuals, private companies. Since the 1990s, we've had an explosion contracting out of services that were once only provided by the public sector. But in order to get a contract, you got to put in a bid. In order to put in a bid, you got to show the true cost of how much it costs to provide that service. All right? We had a presentation earlier, right? Pila showed us. Well, they provide these services, and they try to keep the cost down. What was it, 82%? Keep administrative costs at 17%. And most of the money is going into providing service. When you bids, they have to have detailed analysis, so forth and so on. And if you want to get the bid, you try to put in as low as bid as possible. So now, agents are competing with one another. So now the principal has the information. Now I jumped ahead a little bit. 1950s was a time of unprecedented growth in the United States. The end of the Second World War, GI Bill was passed. Baby boomers, young kids, you needed houses for returning vets, you needed new schools, you needed new universities, whole new cities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Jobs were plentiful. This is when the suburbs really exploded, started to explode in the United States. Then there's the concept of how do we keep since their local governments have a monopoly, a lot of times the services are poor. We have a lot of local governments forming. How can we try to conceptualize a way to control costs? This was simple. It's a public choice theory in the sense of local agencies, in a way, are competing with one another. For investment, for businesses, and for people who can pay higher tax revenues, who can pay higher taxes. That increases budgets. And local governments are incentivized to keep the cost of their services under control so that they can attract businesses and so residents can afford to buy those expensive homes. And this underlying concept of the rational man is that families, or whatever, will try to maximize the services that they consume, public services, for the amount of money, income that they have. All right? So basically stating, it states that as a family, you're going to search around an area, a metropolitan area, to find the best set of public goods that you can for the amount of income that you have. The nicest house that you can get, the best school district, the nicest parks. And the communities that are able to provide that, the most affordable rate, will be able to attract citizens who can pay higher taxes, really, and have higher incomes, so that there's retail revenues, tax revenues coming in as well. All right? And the incentive for governments is that this will increase their budget so they can continue to provide more services, so forth and so on. All right? Now this is abstract in a way, but it's the first conceptualization of how to deal with the public monopoly issue, or how it can be naturally dealt with. All right? Now, inherent in here is still the concept of the invisible man, which, as we saw in one of the classes, sometimes when you need the hand to swoop in, it never comes. All right? This is one of the underlying theories of decentralization, why it works. All right? We are still using this in different forms or another today. Now, took two local cities to give you, we're going to start going now how budgets are built. Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, very close to one another. The populations are very similar. So over here, it's Mount Vernon, 67,000, New Rochelle, 77,000. Mount Vernon has 11,000 parcels of land, and New Rochelle has 16,000. Parcel of land is a piece of property. All right? A piece of property. All right? So we add up the value of every piece of property in the city. There's an appraisal value. All right? So you have a piece of property, you have to pay taxes on it. And that tax is based upon somebody going out there and saying this piece of property is worth this amount. All right? So after every piece of property in the town has been appraised, the value is added. That's the assessed value. All right? So Mount Vernon is 153. It says 153 million. New Rochelle, 272 million. part of those billion, that's in thousands. They make the numbers smaller so it's easier to understand. You got the self-appraisal of Westchester County. Right? As you can see, in this city, the appraisal value, even though it's not half the population, it's about half the appraisal value, right, of a neighboring city. Part of that is a function of the prices of homes. The average home in Mount Vernon is $334,000. In New Rochelle, it's $583,000. There are more parcels in New Rochelle. Right? Now for the Mount Vernon, $334,000. In Westchester County, that's not a high number, but in America, that's a high number. Right? So things are relative, depends on the area that you're in. Right? So the median household income is $47,000 in Mount Vernon, $64,000 in New Rochelle.
And this was in 2007?
Well, the New Rochelle is 2007. Mount Vernon is I pulled that off today. That's today.
That's what I said.
Yeah. Now, one of the things here, they're about similar. They have about the same amount of kids. The population is about the same. And the school district budgets are about the same. Even though this is 5 years old, it's old. The numbers are about the same. All right? So how does this city end up with about the same amount of budget as this city? What's going on here? Anyone know?
Was the city of New Rochelle or the city of Mount Vernon?
New Rochelle. Mount Vernon.
Or just this comparison?
2007 New Rochelle figures and Mount Vernon today is no difference.
How does this total school district budget, how are they similar?
I would say because one or the other has to provide more services than the other, like it's a crime or school systems,
Maybe. But
public
even
services are different.
in a way, but at face value, if the budgets are the same and the populations are nearly the same, then you would assume the services are the same. Or similar.
Because of the property value.
Go ahead,
We
Andrea.
figure with the city of New Rochelle brings in enough business revenue. But with the city of Mount Vernon, they bring in more external revenue, which comes from the state and federal. So what you do is you keep the population under a certain bracket as far as certain money. So the money that comes into the city of Mount Vernon basically maintains Westchester County, which is public assistance, which is about 23%. So that's where they kind of balance it off as far as the city of Mount Vernon keeping that amount as far as district. Just saying. But that's what it
It's
is.
the budget, what you're saying, part of the budget is supplemented.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's kept at a certain bracket for a reason, so, but that's, that's conservative.
Anything else? Any more? I heard some more comments. More comments?
I'm thinking of just the value of the property, Mount Vernon versus New Rochelle. If that's the figure in 2007, what is the value of it net, the school district, I'm sorry, the school district 2007 from New Rochelle, what is it now?
It's close to the same. I
Close to the same?
couldn't pull that figure
Okay.
right off of it. It's close to the same because the values went up and they plummeted, and now they've kind of come back a little bit. They kind of evened out. So it's similar. It's not far from this.
Okay.
But there's a bigger question. Are the services equal?
No.
The budget is equal.
Right.
They're both monopolies.
Right.
At face value, if you don't know the area, if you don't know anything,
The value of the home.
Property taxes.
something there with that home average, I just don't know how.
Yeah, but that's
But there's
internal.
something in there.
Internal?
In the Rochelle.
Again, the home values for local government are a large part of the pie, right? It's tax revenue, right? And why did I put home values and per capita median household income, right? But most of your, at least 60-70% of the budget is going to be property taxes, and sales tax.
Right.
All right? So those two variables are key. Property and sales. All right? So when we talk about competition among cities, those two variables. All right? But it's a challenge. I mean, you can't always shape who your clientele is when you move into the city. If people can do that, but people try, right?
But doesn't a better school district attract
Higher people.
income people?
Right.
Okay. That's the underlying theory, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. Good. Good.
Well, the city of New Rochelle, they attracted Trump. So that can put them a whole nother, you've got the city, what's available in New Rochelle? New Rochelle is 2 colleges, 3 colleges actually. Monroe, and New Rochelle.
Yes.
The city now has none.
So we're talking about amenities, right? The composition of an area, the public amenities, they matter, right? People are attracted, whatever your income is, you're going to try to maximize your benefit. That's the underlying theory here, all right? But at face value, if you're not familiar with an area, you just look at a population and you look at the budget, they're both monopolies. They can always justify why it costs a particular amount to provide a service. All right? Now, we talked about a couple variables, housing and retail. The tools that local government can use is zoning. All right? Zoning. In every community, every town, there's a law. It's called the zoning code. It's written. It says you can build this here. It's residential, commercial, high density, parks, open space, etc., etc. All right? In America, there is no truly free market. You hear people, the market is the freest country in the world. Every aspect of life, there has to be approval. All right? So we looked over it. Every business that opens, someone has to sign off. All right? Every place that sells alcohol, every restaurant, someone has to sign off. And then there's codes after codes after codes. A lot of times there's a public hearing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right? But zoning is a tool that is used by public agencies to try to maximize their tax base. One of the things that continues to come up is exclusionary zoning. Exclusionary. Excluding out the poor or the undesirable people in your community through the use of the zoning code. And the way that you do that, you limit multifamily, or it has to be very high class in a certain area, have certain amenities.
Again, which has to do with the value, which reflects on the value of the property.
Value of the property, right? But also less people.
Yes.
Your services are less, will cost less. Well, your density is less, your school district, you'll be less impacted by your school district. but the infrastructure costs more. Water lines, sewer lines, roads, things like that. People tend to be willing to pay more.
For low taxes, low crime, all that other stuff, so they want to pay more.
In theory, right? Also more accessible government, that's another thing, so people can have control of the government.
Like towns and villages.
Huh?
Like towns or villages. For
So
sure.
you go to City Hall and talk to somebody. You get, something happens in New York City, who do you talk to? You go to this department, you go to this office, you go to the restaurant. Now, there have been a lot of studies done about the concept of fragmentation, because on one hand, it's conceptual theory that governments competing with one another is what keeps the cost of the provision of services really as low as possible, contained. This is the only, I should say, theory that we've really come up with as to how to deal with the public monopoly problem, especially with local governments. It's that people choose the amenities that they want. And if governments are providing services at the lowest cost possible, that are high quality, then residents will move there, desirable residents. But one of the other problems, the flip side of this, is that it exacerbates social inequality, especially with regard to public education. Because everyone can't get up and move and vote with their feet. Because like we spoke about earlier, there's costs involved in moving. The big down payment, a certain amount of income, credit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right? And when you're from about 4 or 5 years old to 16 years old, it's hard for you to take control of your education. To know, you know what, I want to go to this school over here, it's better. First of all, you don't have the power. Because where you go to school is determined based upon where you live. And how much is private school? Like going to college, right? So, certain areas, schools are really nice. Typically, the property values are higher there. Sometimes, some places in schools, they struggle. Property values may not be low, but they may be lower compared to the rest of the area, because location is relative in America, in the United States. For example, $334,000, you can live in Texas, in the nicest neighborhoods and the biggest houses, right? But in New York, it's not that way. It's relative, right? So one of the arguments is that yes, fragmentation is one of the ways that keeps the cost of provision of services down, because government compete with one another. On the flip side of that, it exacerbates and locks in social inequality within our society, and it's really reflected in our school districts, because education is really the one equalizer that we have in society, but also the public services that are provided, all other public services, all right? been studies that have been done that say, you know, the best predictor of where someone will end up in life is not how well they do on standardized tests, but it's really the economic status of their parents. Which is contrary to a lot of the, how should I say, really the rhetoric in America, right? You work hard, you do hard, you can always rise above whatever obstacles you face. In a lot of ways, that's true. In some instances, but for the majority, socioeconomically, they tend to end up in the same place as their parents. Same type of jobs. In this study they did in the 1970s, back in 2000, they followed the students and did this comparative analysis. But they also studied the schools, and they noticed there's a difference between working class schools and schools in wealthier areas. In the working class schools, there was more focus, being on time, completing the work in a systematic and routine manner, and following directions. Upper income schools, there's more about being creative, thinking through situations, coming up with alternative solutions. It was more about quality. In time, those types of lessons, they transpire into different types of outcomes. Now, for the first type of working class school, what do you think that's training for? What type of job?
Labor.
Labor-intensive jobs, right? You don't show up on time in the morning. I mean, most jobs you don't show up on time, right? For some professional jobs, there's more flexibility, right? Following orders, strict regimen, so forth and so on, okay? Okay, I'm going to show you a little bit of an example, a local example.
This is David. This is Owen. They're both navigating senior year in Long Island Public High School.
Everybody in the school knows me. There's a lot of kids in school that look up to me. Sometimes I question why, but you know. I'm very outgoing, and so like it's easy for me to make friends. I'm like friends with like everybody, pretty much in my grade.
David and Owen have many similarities.
My grades are high. I'm vice president of my school. I'm captain of the track team. Track meets every day until like 4-ish. And right after that, my extracurriculars. My average, it's really very good. Alright, that's like phenomenal. But I was raised by my mom. My brother, my sister, and I live with my mom. My family, we're not the wealthiest, you know, and so the extra money I get, I help pay like bills and stuff. My mom, she had a lot of things already that she pays for it, so I got my job so I can help pay for stuff in school. Currently, I'm working at Carmel.
David and Owen may have many similarities, but they go to very different schools.
In other schools, they have more of opportunity that we don't have here. We don't have the best textbooks here. We don't really have any AP classes here. We don't have any teachers. I know that is more out there. This is a great school. I think that everyone should have an opportunity to go to a school like this. That's what I think.
As a society which has devotion to individuality, we have a hard time seeing structures. Either we don't see them, or when we do see them, they look like they're completely natural and inevitable. A society which has devotion to individuality, we have a hard time seeing structures. Either we don't see them, or when we do see them, they look like they're completely natural and inevitable. Long Island is a suburban region that's incredibly fragmented, which means fragmented tax base, fragmented job centers, and fragmented school system. When we have this fragmentation in America, you're almost always likely to have racial and economic segregation. You have these systems where, on one hand, you have a school system that's apparently working okay, and right next to them, they have a school system that's not working. It creates a lot of internal tension, and internal tension affects everyone.
I just got to make sure that everything from my college stuff is done. My guidance counselor, she's head of student government, she's head of National Honor Society, she's all over the place, so when she's available, I can ask her for help, but most of the time I have to do by myself. My mom works all day, so I can't really ask her to really help me. My older sister, she's going to a trade school, so when she's home, I'm at school. When I'm home, she's at school. I don't think I can need help from my older sister.
So today, 12 is what you got. Okay, so one. Mr. Ward.
She said 20 minutes.
I would bet.
You gotta build one.
She said 20 minutes. I used to live in Queens, Jamaica, Queens, not the best neighborhood. So my mom did a lot of research, but she wanted me to go to school. And so when my mom told me I was going to Rockville Center, I was nervous because I was like, all right, it's not going to be fun.
It's tired.
So I should set this up before we start.
I used to live in Queens, Jamaica, Queens, not the best neighborhood. So my mom did a lot of research, but she wanted me to go to school. And so when my mom told me I was going to Rockville Center, I was nervous because I was like, all right, it's not going to be fun. Since it's like not that many black kids in the school, I was just like, okay, it's not going to be the best year. Maybe people will treat me different. Oh yeah, I didn't finish my those scholarship thing. Yeah, it's great. No, I actually went to like 8 other ones.
For Owen, the first time I saw him, I recognized him as being new, because I at least recognized most of the black kids. And he didn't, when he first got here, he wasn't a part of that crowd right away. So I guess initially there was a little bit of estrangement there, but then once I was in class with him, I got a better picture of who he was. So, well, that part is. Now, I'm very good friends with him. I give him around school every day. There's plenty of nights where we'll be working on some kind of paper or project together, and I'm able to help him with homework occasionally, and he helps me, sort of bounce each other out, I guess.
Oh, that's really good compliment. Remember when I told you, I was like 11.5. When I got to school, I came in towards the middle of the year, like 2 weeks before midterms. David helped me out in a few subjects that I needed help in. And like certain kids are just nice. I didn't expect that to happen.
When we isolate students into rich school districts and poor school districts, we have tremendous disparity in terms of resources.
All administrators stand in the hallway every period to get them to move along and be where they need to be, because that's what they need, that interaction. I will point out the fact that we do have metal detectors here in our school, because it is a reality, and if we're going to keep our students safe, and we need to use every technology that we can to make sure that students are safe.
In a school like Wyandanch, we already know that there are so many challenges that our students come with throughout the community. But we don't have the resource, the financial resources, to give the students what they need. More teachers, more school psychologists, and more social workers.
Our school district doesn't have a lot of
We don't have the resource, the financial resources, to give the students what they need. More teachers, more school psychologists, and more social workers.
Our school district doesn't have a lot of businesses, so the money
to fund these programs, and it does cost a lot of money to fund these programs, have to come directly from the community. Meaning that any program that you want to implement, you need to tax the community to do. And this community has little businesses to help support that taxing.
We always have to worry about our budget, just like everyone else, but we're lucky enough to have the community that really is very supportive in terms of funding of education. In terms of Long Island, Rockville Centre would be in the middle of the pack in terms of resources. You have to have resources. If you have class sizes of 45, if you can't afford to have support classes, you're not going to be able to serve your students well. I mean, that's a given.
You know that the economy has been really bad. We've had a lot of losses on Wall Street. So yesterday, Governor Patterson had to introduce a lot of cuts in the budget. Some of them sound very strange. Here's a killer. Roosevelt School District, supposed to get $12 million, cut back to $6 million. So you know, yeah. So you know the $1.5 million that we needed, we will not do that. So we'll be very fortunate to keep all of our teachers next year. And one of the last ones hired, you know, I'm a little worried. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. Now, wait. Hold it. There are a couple of other things, okay? State University of New York. The tuition is going to go up another $620 a year. What?
We can't afford it as it is.
I can't make that anybody.
If everybody's losing their jobs, how do they expect you to?
Why are they investing
Exactly.
Why do you think he's making all these drastic cuts?
This is
What
the
are these
president.
drastic decisions?
Is he trying to help us? I heard it.
Well, what is it?
I think this is trying to
I mean, his intention is to help us, but in our point of view, it's hurting.
We're going to do it with a show of hands. I'm an independent thinker. I know my own mind.
Yeah.
Independent thinker, I know my own mind. I can remember pieces of music easily. Okay. I enjoy logic problem, puzzles. Ready? So, quick slide.
The philosophy of the school is to really play to the multiple intelligences of students. Southside and the IB program really had a commitment to diversity and to all students.
Generally associated, maybe we learn to sort of question what we learn, not necessarily.
When you have cultural diversity in the class, it adds a dimension of understanding for every child in the class. And amazing things start to happen.
All right, it's finished. This is your class profile. The question is, does this shape who you are? Do you tend to be these things?
Not necessarily. This is a sort of high linguistics and mathematics, you know, if we want to pursue that in college.
Okay. There's a difference between liking something and being good at it.
Exactly. When I'm going to look for a job, I'm not going to look for what's interesting and what's fun. I'm just going to look for the money. That's all I care about. No, I'm actually serious though.
Everybody see money higher? Okay. People have different motivators. Is money a motivator? For some people it is. For some it is simply they satisfy. You all read it. You all just read Death of the Salesman. In the last scene of Death of the Salesman at the rape reading, Biff says, no, the only way we're going to be happy out there is if I go out there, work with my hands. I don't care whether it's better off, I don't care how much money I make, as long as I'm happy doing the job. What's Biff's point? Anybody can
we had enough of that. So we saw two schools, local schools, right? It's two school districts working with one another. They talked about some of the things that we kind of went over in terms of decentralization, fragmented delivery of services. And one of the underlying things is that on the one hand, theory says it keeps the cost of the provision of services low, or lower than they otherwise would be, because public agencies have a monopoly on the provision of a service, right? So there's no direct way to know the true cost, right? On the other hand, there's inequality, right? That's entrenched, really, in one way, it's locked because of this decentralization of services, right? Because if you can afford the best services, you move there, right? You move your children there, right? If you can't afford to go there, then you have to take what you can get, right? And we talked about the types of schools and what the training is. What are some of the differences in these two schools? Money budget. What's the budget shaped by? Say it again. The community. Community. What attributes of the community? Their input into the school. And how's that facilitated? Tax dollars, right? Now, the wealthier school, if you looked, when they were walking down the street, the homes were nice, they were manicured. Right? It was amazing, right? Now, what about when they were in the hallways? Right? What was the first principal doing? Was it whining? Cattle farm the students. What did he say? They needed it, right? They needed it. In the classroom, what kind of discussion did they have?
Reality.
Was it reality, or was it a vision of reality? Because it was that teacher's vision of reality. And what did she teach those kids?
Fear.
Fear. What else? Hopelessness. And how is that communicated? Did she say I'm hopeless, or how did the conversation go?
I went to last until I got my job.
That's great, thank you, yeah, that's why.
I mean, on one hand, it was a lesson in government. It was a lesson in government. It was a lesson about the budget. Patterson, yes, he came in the office, but he had to make some tough decisions, right? That was the beginning of this financial crisis. Nobody knew what to really do. People were stumbling through it, right? Public agencies, yeah, they're taking cuts. There's still cuts going on, right?
It was like her paper.
So it was a lesson, but it was the way the lesson was conveyed, and also the way to how to take the knowledge. I mean, they could have been talking about the budget cuts in a constructive, positive way, right? But in a way, she was teaching those kids how to accept failure, accept defeat, accept their place in society, right? To accept their place in society, because she lived that way, all right? Now, what was going on in the other classroom? Why was it in education?
In the better off, it was in school.
Doesn't matter. What's going on?
In actual education, he was teaching them the nuts and bolts of whatever the issue, or was. Okay, I couldn't, because it was kind of blurry when I heard it on the grades, but he was teaching.
Yeah, go ahead, Andre.
What he was teaching was he was giving them the option of choice. Whereas at the other school, Wyandan's, which should be changed, they were getting reality. This is what I picked up. They were getting reality, but also the reality of how to think outside the box. Because their responses was letting them know, you can make it, but okay, what do you do to get that? They have to
In
get
the
more.
first school or the second school?
The first school, the second school,
That they
they
can
had
make it?
options. I believe that. I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I went to a majority white school. I was the only black person my freshman and sophomore year. So I had to try harder, I had to study harder, and I watched white kids, you know, go by and cheat and do whatever. So it was only 9 of us when we first started.
Yes, but right now,
Uh-huh.
what was going on in the first
But that's
class
what
and
I'm
the
getting-
second class? We're
but
talking
that's-
about the lesson. The
But
lesson.
again, no, but I'm explaining
I don't
that.
mean to cut you off.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we're at that.
I'll get to it now.
One, in the first case, you know, it was a very direct lesson. In the second case, it was critical thinking and inspired.
Let's say it again.
Critical thinking, decision making, introspection. They were teaching the students how to choose, how to think, not what to think and in what way to think. That was the real thing.
What they were up against. Did you have something?
I was going to talk about the critical thinking and how they were encouraging one another to study and, you know.
One of the main things, one of the students said, the teacher is teaching me how to question the knowledge that he presents, that they present. He went through one of those job profiles in class. The student said, that doesn't really fit me. If she could stop, somebody tell her, the teacher was telling the student, was showing the students how to think through what's presented directly to them. Right? That's critical thinking. In retrospect, that's saying do not accept the world as it is laid in front of your feet. Think through it.
I thought he was asking who do instrument and really celebrating individuality.
Individuality, right? What people had to bring to the table. Understand yourself. Right? Be true to yourself. All right? Now, in terms of this lesson, think through these artificial lines that we have created in society. All right? This is the way we organize our society now. It serves a function. It benefits some, does not benefit others. But as we move along, is it sustainable? Is it what we need to do to move into the 21st century? Is it going to make us a better country? Is that better suited for the 20th century or the 21st century? All right? Also, from a budgetary perspective, you have to know the rules of the game, the parameters, once you step into an executive position. What is the composition of the community that you're serving? What variables impact your budget? All right? You're a lower income community. Okay, you know there's more scarcity. All right? You know that. You know the variables that are there. Is there anything that you can do? Is there any way that you can supplement your budget? All right? Huh? Trade?
Trade off.
Trade off? Well, as we start moving forward, we have to start thinking about this from an executive position, all right? Because these are public agencies, and a lot of times salaries are the same. You'll be surprised in some of the poorer areas, salaries may be higher than they are in wealthier areas.
Like an incentive, right?
Maybe, or maybe the public isn't there complaining. Remember, it's a monopoly. You have to take what you can get or move, all right? An example, go online tonight and look at both these cities. What budget can you find? What budget can you not find?
Transparency.
Transparency. What's it take to get transparency? All right? That's the lesson for this evening. Are there any questions? Okay, good. Have a good evening. See y'all next week.
Thank you.
Get here now. Move faster.
I'll wait for 1 second.
Oh, if you turned in your paper last week, I'm sorry I did not grade them, but I will send you an email. I'll do it electronically, all right, and send it to you. Some people, they